I said play, Miss Brooks. Principal Whitaker's voice rang cold through the silent auditorium as hundreds of eyes locked onto the trembling girl clutching a violin she'd never touched before. Amara's heart pounded in her ears, her hands slick with sweat, as the weight of humiliation pressed down harder than the pain in her back. What no one expected, especially the ones who wanted her to fail, was that within moments, the girl they tried to silence would make the entire room fall breathlessly silent for all the right reasons. With shoulders tense and eyes fixed on the floor, 15-year-old Amara Brooks stood quietly at the back of the Northbridge Academy auditorium, trying her best to remain invisible. Her heart pounded beneath her pressed uniform, every breath shallow as she shifted from one foot to the other. A dull ache shot up her lower back, a bitter reminder of what had happened the day before, a moment that left more than just a physical wound. She had hoped to avoid attention by standing in the last row, away from the sea of pristine seats filled with students in perfect posture. But Principal Lorraine Whitaker's eyes were like twin lasers, always scanning, always judging. And today, they locked onto Amara. The woman's voice, sharp as a blade, cut through the hum of restless students. "Miss Brooks," she said with the tight smile of someone who enjoyed control. "Why aren't you sitting with the rest of your classmates? Do you think the rules don't apply to you?" A few snickers rippled through the room, bouncing between polished marble walls. Amara's lips parted, but her voice failed her at first. She glanced around, hoping, praying someone else would speak up for her. No one did. I can't sit, ma'am," she finally stammered, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "My back, oh. Your back hurts?" Principal Whitaker interrupted, her eyebrows raised with theatrical surprise. "That's convenient." The room went quiet. Everyone sensed something ugly was about to happen. Whitaker strode down the center aisle in her pristine white suit, each step deliberate, echoing like a judge's gavel. She reached the front of the auditorium, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, and turned to face the students. "You see, young people," she began, "discipline is the foundation of achievement. But some students think they're above it. They think rules are for others. So, to reinforce the importance of humility, I'd like to make an announcement." Then she turned slowly, dramatically, back toward Amara. "Miss Brooks will be performing a solo violin piece at the Spring Showcase in 2 weeks. 3 minutes. Live. In front of all of you." A few students gasped. Some burst into laughter. Others turned and stared at Amara with open mouths. Amara's heart dropped. Her legs nearly gave out. "But I've never played the violin," she said weakly, eyes wide with panic. "Then you better learn quickly," Whitaker replied with a smirk. "I hear pressure builds character." The auditorium roared with chatter as Principal Whitaker calmly walked off stage, her heels clicking in triumph. Amara stood frozen in place, trembling, the sound of laughter and disbelief surrounding her like a suffocating fog. But no one saw the pain that throbbed beneath her uniform, the blood that had stained her back just yesterday. It had all started in Mr. Banks' English class. A man whose disdain for students like Amara wasn't just passive, it was palpable. That morning, Amara had entered a few minutes late, apologizing breathlessly after the previous class had run over. Mr. Banks didn't even look up from his desk. "Back seat," he muttered coldly. The only available chair in the room was clearly broken, its backrest jagged with a sharp piece of metal sticking out. Amara hesitated, biting her lip. "Something wrong?" Mr. Banks asked, lifting his gaze, his tone laced with menace. "No, sir," she murmured, and slowly lowered herself, carefully trying to avoid the protrusion. But Mr. Banks wasn't satisfied. He marched over, placed his hand on her shoulder, and forced her back against the chair. Pain ripped through her body. She yelped. "Causing a scene again, are we?" he sneered. "Out. Go to the principal's office. Now." Her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to explain, to scream that the chair had cut her, but shame and fear tied her tongue. At the office, the secretary told her Whitaker was in a meeting. "Wait outside," she said with a dismissive wave. Amara sat alone in the hall for nearly 2 hours, blood slowly soaking into her shirt. No one came. No one asked. That evening, Amara didn't speak a word during dinner. Her mother, Denise Brooks, worked double shifts at the hospital and returned home too exhausted to notice the subtle winces as Amara moved. Later, as she changed in her room, she removed the blood-stained uniform and opened her closet for a fresh top. That's when it happened. A worn cardboard box at the back of the shelf tipped forward, spilling old photos onto the carpet. With a groan, she knelt down, wincing as her muscles protested, and began to gather the photos. Her fingers paused on a particular one, an image that froze her in place. A young man in a tailored black suit stood proudly on a concert hall stage, a violin in his hands and a smile of pure joy lighting his face. Her breath caught in her throat. She flipped it over. Scribbled on the back, in a looping hand, were the words, Samuel Brooks, Senior Recital, Eastman Conservatory. Her father. Amara barely remembered him. He had died in a car crash when she was just 5. All she had were flashes, his laugh, the scent of cedar, the way he'd twirl her in the living room. But no one ever mentioned he played the violin, much less studied at a prestigious music school. She rushed downstairs, photo in hand. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you ever tell me Dad played the violin?" Denise looked up from the kitchen table, her eyes softening instantly as they landed on the photo. She reached out and took it gently, her expression folding into one of nostalgia and sorrow. "Oh, baby," she said, her voice catching. "He didn't just play. He was incredible. Music was his soul. He got a full ride to Eastman. Had dreams of joining a symphony until we found out I was pregnant with you. He chose us over everything." Amara blinked back tears. "I didn't know." Denise reached across the table, covering Amara's hand. "He didn't talk much about it toward the end. But he kept that violin close. Even after he stopped playing, he'd polish it once a week. Said it reminded him of who he was before the world changed." Amara's throat tightened. "Do you still have it? His violin?" Denise nodded slowly. "It's in the attic. I couldn't bear to part with it." Later that night, alone in her room, Amara sat on her bed, the photo in one hand and a heating pad pressed against her injured back. The weight of the day had been crushing. The humiliation, the laughter, the ache. But this photo, this man she only barely remembered, he became something new in that moment. Not a fading memory, but a symbol of strength, of sacrifice, of a legacy unfulfilled. As tears slipped quietly down her cheeks, she whispered to the darkness, "I'll do it, Dad. I'll try. Not because she told me to, but because you gave it up for me." And with that vow hanging silently in the night air, something inside her began to shift. The pain didn't vanish. The fear still lingered. But there was something else now too. A spark. A pulse. A distant but rising note waiting to become a symphony. The morning sun crept slowly over the modest rooftops of East Atlanta, casting a soft glow across Amara Brooks' bedroom walls. The photograph of her father, Samuel Brooks, still sat gently propped on her nightstand like a sacred vow she'd made just hours earlier. She had barely slept. The promise she whispered into the darkness still echoed in her chest: she would play. Not because Principal Whitaker demanded it, not to prove anything to the sneering crowd at Northbridge Academy, but because her father had once carried that dream in his hands, and now she would carry it in hers. But even with this new fire in her heart, Amara knew one thing: she couldn't do it alone. At school, she avoided eye contact, her body stiff with nerves and pain. The murmurs followed her down every hallway, whispers of mockery, snide comments, laughter disguised as curiosity. But she kept walking, past the trophy case, past the immaculate portraits of past valedictorians, none of whom looked like her. When the lunch bell rang, she made her way to the back of the courtyard where a familiar figure waited. Layla Parker, her best friend since 4th grade, sat cross-legged under a maple tree, plucking at the strings of her well-worn violin. The sound was soft, warm, and immediately made Amara feel a little steadier. "So, Is it true? Layla asked without looking up. That Whitaker's making you play solo? Amara dropped her bag and nodded slowly. Yeah. 3 minutes. 2 weeks from now. Layla's bow stilled. You've never even touched a violin, Mara. That's insane. I know. But I want to try. Not because of her. Because of my dad. She showed Layla the photos she'd carried in her notebook all day. Layla looked at it, then at Amara. Okay, she said finally, her voice firm. Then let's get to work. For the next several days, the two girls met after school in the small patch of grass behind the gym, hidden from the eyes of most students and faculty. Layla began with the basics: posture, finger placement, how to hold the bow, how not to drop it. Every movement was a struggle for Amara. Her back still throbbed, her muscles stiffened with every reach, every twist. But she bit down on her lip and kept going. Layla never pushed too hard. She was patient. Encouraging. She adjusted Amara's grip gently, explained things twice, sometimes 3 times. Think of it like breathing, she'd say. It has to flow from the inside out. They laughed when the violin squeaked. They groaned when Amara hit wrong notes. But slowly, painfully slowly, something started to click. One afternoon, as Amara ran through scales for the 100th time, a voice called out from behind a nearby window. Not bad, the voice said. Amara jumped. Layla turned quickly. At the edge of the school building, leaning against the doorway of the old music wing, stood Mr. Franklin Monroe. Tall, reserved, always in a charcoal gray vest and tie, Mr. Monroe had been at Northbridge longer than most of the faculty combined. His classes were for advanced students only, kids with years of training. Amara had never spoken to him before. I didn't mean to interrupt, he said, walking toward them. But I couldn't help hearing that scale. You're a little stiff in the left wrist, but your tone isn't bad. Especially for someone who's just beginning. Amara's face flushed. I didn't know anyone could hear us out here. Most can't, he said with a small smile. But I've got a habit of keeping my window open when the weather's kind. And today, it was kind enough to let your music in. Layla looked at Amara, who nodded hesitantly. We've got 2 weeks, Amara said. 3 minutes to fill. I've never performed. I've never even practiced inside a real music room. Mr. Monroe's smile faded slightly. And I assume Principal Whitaker had no intention of giving you the support you'd need? Amara didn't answer. She didn't need to. All right then, he said after a pause. Come see me after school tomorrow. Room 204. Just you. That next day, Amara stepped into room 204 with her borrowed violin, an old-school instrument Layla had helped her check out from the library's dusty storage cabinet. The room was quiet, lined with shelves of sheet music, and carried the faint smell of varnished wood and time. Mr. Monroe didn't waste a second. Show me what you know. Amara played the short scale they'd been working on. She stumbled through it, her fingers hesitant. When she finished, she lowered the violin and waited for criticism. But it didn't come. You're better than I expected, he said. Now let's get to work. For the next hour, he corrected her hand positions, adjusted her posture, and talked to her, not like a teacher talking to a failing student, but like a mentor guiding someone with potential. You've got instinct, he told her. And something else, resolve. That's rarer than talent. The sessions became a routine. After the final bell, Amara would slip away to room 204, where Mr. Monroe would be waiting with a new technique or a short piece to practice. He never asked why she was doing this. But his support never wavered. Until one day, it stopped. She showed up to find the door locked and a note taped to the front, room closed until further notice. Administrative directive. Her stomach dropped. Later that day, she learned from Layla that Principal Whitaker had ordered the music rooms to be closed for non-advanced students unless granted special permission. The sabotage had begun. And it didn't stop there. Mr. Banks, with a smug expression, began assigning extra homework only to Amara, essays due overnight, pop quizzes no one else had to take. During class, he openly mocked her effort. "Miss Brooks, unless you're writing your musical masterpiece in this essay, I expect better grammar." Students snickered. Teachers looked the other way. Amara grew more exhausted by the day. But she didn't stop. With no access to music rooms, she and Layla practiced outside, underneath flickering street lamps, near the rusting bleachers, even in the tiny laundry room of Amara's apartment complex when it rained. The pain in her back flared up constantly. Some nights, she cried from frustration, from shame, from feeling like she was fighting a battle no one else could see. But every morning, she picked up the violin again. One Friday afternoon, Mr. Monroe called her unexpectedly. "Meet me downtown," he said. "There's something I want to show you." They drove in silence to a narrow side street lined with old buildings. One store stood out, a vintage music shop called Harper & Company. Strings. Inside, the air smelled of rosin and old paper. The walls were covered in photographs of long-forgotten performers. Behind the counter, a man with snowy hair and gentle eyes looked up and smiled. "This her?" he asked. Mr. Monroe nodded. The man disappeared into a back room and returned moments later with a black velvet case. He opened it with reverence, revealing a beautifully aged violin. "Your father left this here 15 years ago," the man said. "Said he couldn't play anymore, but he wanted it to be kept safe. Said maybe one day, his daughter would come looking." Amara's knees went weak. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the polished wood, the curves familiar yet foreign. Her father's violin. The very instrument from the photo. Mr. Monroe placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not just playing for a school showcase, Amara. You're playing for him. For every note he never got to share. For the voice that was silenced." That night, Amara didn't sleep. She stayed up, bow in hand, playing softly in the dim glow of her bedside lamp. She didn't care if it squeaked or if her fingers fumbled. She was no longer trying to survive Whitaker's punishment. She was playing to speak. To yield. To honor. And the violin, it was beginning to speak back. The violin had always felt foreign in her hands, an unfamiliar weight, a carved piece of wood that once mocked her with its silence, but now, as Amara Brooks stood backstage in the grand auditorium of Northbridge Academy on the night of the spring showcase, it felt like a lifeline, like her father's spirit gently resting against her shoulder. The polished wood of the instrument he once played shimmered beneath the stage lights leaking through the curtains, and for the first time in 2 agonizing weeks, Amara wasn't afraid of the sound it would make. Her palms were slick with sweat, her stomach twisted in tight knots, but she could feel something deeper swelling inside her, resolve, purpose, a voice too long silenced. The memories of Layla's gentle instruction under dim streetlights, Mr. Monroe's quiet but steady encouragement, and the powerful moment in Harper & Company. Strings when she first touched her father's violin, they all pulsed in her veins like music waiting to be played. But beyond the curtain, she knew what waited. Dozens of students whispering with cruel anticipation, teachers who had turned their backs, and in the front row, Principal Lorraine Whitaker and Mr. Gerald Banks sitting like smug predators ready to devour her failure. She had heard Whitaker's voice earlier, cool and cutting. "She'll make a fool of herself before the second measure. She's not built for this." And yet, here she was, trembling not with fear, but with something far more dangerous, hope. A soft tap on her shoulder made her turn, and there stood Mr. Monroe, his eyes full of quiet pride. "They're ready for you," he said gently. "And Amara, no matter what happens out there, remember, it's not about perfection. It's about truth. Let the music speak for you." Amara gave a slight nod, drew in a breath that filled every aching inch of her lungs, and stepped forward as her name echoed across the auditorium. The lights were blinding, the silence piercing. Every pair of eyes turned toward the small girl at center stage. Some smirked. Some whispered. But Amara didn't look at them. She planted her feet, raised her father's violin to her chin, closed her eyes, and drew the bow across the strings. The first note trembled, uncertain. The second followed with a little more courage. And by the time she reached the fourth, something miraculous began to happen. The sound deepened. Her fingers danced with grace. The melody rose like a question, then settled like an answer, curling around the auditorium and wrapping itself around every soul present. It was haunting. It was beautiful. It was unmistakably hers. There was no backing track, no accompaniment, only Amara, her violin, and the echoes of a legacy reborn. In the front row, Principal Whitaker shifted in her seat, her confident smirk faltering. Mr. Banks blinked, lips tightening with disbelief. The audience, once restless, now sat frozen in place, caught in the spell woven by the girl they had underestimated. Amara's back still ached, her fingers burned from hours of practice, but none of it mattered now. Every bow stroke was a declaration: I belong here. I am enough. And you will hear me. The final note rang out, suspended in the air like a heartbeat, and for a moment there was only stillness. Then, thunderous applause. The room erupted. Students stood. Parents clapped wildly. Some even wiped away tears. Mr. Monroe stood beside the stage, his eyes shining with emotion. Layla cried quietly in the wings. But just as Amara lowered her violin and took her first bow, a new voice cut through the clamor, a voice not from the audience, but from the side entrance of the auditorium. "Excuse me," said a woman in a crisp black suit, holding a thick folder and flanked by two uniformed officers. The applause tapered into confused murmurs. "My name is Jennifer Kincaid. I'm with the Georgia Department of Education's Office of Equity and Accountability. I apologize for the interruption, but we have urgent business to address." Every head turned. Miss Kincaid walked steadily to the front of the stage, eyes fixed on the stunned figures of Principal Whitaker and Mr. Banks. "We have conducted a formal investigation into allegations of racial discrimination and abuse of authority at Northbridge Academy. Based on numerous student testimonies and video evidence, some of which were submitted anonymously, we are here to announce the immediate suspension of Principal Lorraine Whitaker and English teacher Gerald Banks." A collective gasp swept across the room. Whitaker rose to her feet, pale and wide-eyed. "This is preposterous," she hissed. "Who sent you this nonsense? Some disgruntled child?" Miss Kincaid didn't flinch. "We have classroom footage, including the incident involving Miss Amara Brooks and a broken chair, as well as audio recordings of multiple derogatory remarks made by both of you in faculty meetings. Furthermore, we have confirmed coordinated efforts to sabotage a student's performance in violation of ethical standards and student protections." Mr. Banks stood as well, sputtering. "This is a setup. You are to leave the premises immediately," Kincaid interrupted coolly. "You will be contacted regarding formal hearings." Two officers stepped forward. The crowd parted as Whitaker and Banks were escorted out under a storm of stunned silence and camera flashes from students' phones. Amara watched it all unfold from the stage, her violin still clutched in her hand. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vengeful. What she felt was something deeper: relief and justice. And then, from the crowd, a single voice called out, "Bravo, Amara!" It was followed by another. And another. The applause surged once more, louder and stronger than before. Mr. Monroe climbed the steps to the stage and leaned close. "You did it," he said quietly. "They heard you." Later that night, after the crowd had dispersed and the hall had gone still, a man approached Amara in the lobby. He was tall, with silver-rimmed glasses and a calm, powerful presence. "Miss Brooks," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Dr. Elijah Foster, Dean of the Atlanta Conservatory of Music. I've been following your journey. And tonight, you played with more truth and soul than I've seen from most professionals. We'd like to offer you a full scholarship, tuition, housing, private mentorship, the works. If you'll have us." Amara stood frozen. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Layla whispered behind her, grinning through tears. And she did. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. News of the performance, the investigation, and Amara's scholarship spread fast. Interviews. Headlines. Hashtags. She was hailed as a symbol of resilience. As a voice for the silenced. Northbridge Academy was placed under oversight. Dr. Danielle Rhodes, a fierce advocate for arts education and equity, was brought in as interim principal. Her first act? Reinstating Mr. Monroe as director of music. Her second? Commissioning a statue in the school's central courtyard of a young girl holding a violin, chin lifted, eyes forward. The plaque read, "To Amara Brooks and every student who dared to rise." On the day of the unveiling, Amara returned to Northbridge in a soft blue dress, standing beside her mother, Layla, and Mr. Monroe. The students welcomed her with applause, not mockery. Pride shimmered in every corner of the school that once tried to break her. As the crowd quieted, Principal Rhodes took the podium. This young woman reminded us all that music is not just about notes and rhythm, it's about truth. And the truth is, we failed her. But she didn't let that stop her. She turned pain into art, silence into song, and injustice into change. That night, Amara sat on the porch of her apartment with her violin across her lap. The moonlight spilled onto the strings, and she played, not for an audience, not for a school, but for herself. For the girl who once stood shaking at the back of an auditorium. For the father who had handed her this dream. And for every voice that had ever been told to be quiet. Her journey was just beginning. But now she had everything she needed, her music, her voice, and the fire to never be silenced again. Amara Brooks' story isn't just about a violin solo, it's about what happens when someone finds their voice in a world that tried to keep them quiet. It's about how strength is often born in silence, in pain, and in moments when no one else is watching. Amara was never handed an easy path. She was overlooked, dismissed, and deliberately sabotaged. But instead of allowing bitterness to consume her, she chose something powerful, she chose to rise. The lesson here is simple, yet deeply profound. Your pain does not disqualify you from purpose. Your voice, no matter how long it has been silenced, deserves to be heard. To every young person who feels small in a room full of loud voices, remember Amara. Remember that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's a girl quietly picking up a violin for the first time, determined to turn humiliation into harmony. To every adult listening, parents, teachers, mentors, remember that your belief in someone can be the very lifeline they need. People like Mr. Monroe and Layla didn't give Amara magic. They gave her time. They gave her truth. They gave her space to grow. And that made all the difference. Amara's journey reminds us that justice isn't just about holding wrongdoers accountable, it's about creating space for healing, for truth, and for dreams to live again. If you are facing injustice, at school, at work, in life, know this, the battle may be long, but with perseverance, support, and faith in who you are, your story can shift from silence to symphony. Let your voice rise, even if it shakes. Let your talent speak, even if they told you it doesn't matter. And most of all, never allow anyone to define your worth based on where you come from, how you look, or how quietly you walk through the world. From all of us at US Daily Story, thank you for listening. Your support means the world to us. If Amara's story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, we invite you to share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing so you don't miss the next powerful story. And remember, every act of courage creates a ripple that can change the world. We see you. We hear you. And we believe in you. See you in the next story.